I tell this the way I tell a long road, straight from the cab and through the windshield. No fancy brakes or neat exits, just mile after mile of what happened, and what I saw, and what might still be riding along with me when the night gets thin. I have been hauling freight long enough to know the difference between a bad stretch of weather and something that wants you, between a tired mind and a mind being worked on, between a deer's eyes in the median and eyes that remember you. I was born in Arkansas, learned to drive on back roads cut through red clay and cottonwoods, and these days I run long routes coast to coast, mostly reefers and dry vans, hopping the arteries everyone knows by number even if they never drove them. I have put chains on in a snow squall on Donner Pass, took brake smoke down into Bakersfield, watched dust devils scribble in the Mojave, crossed the high plains with thunderheads rolling like freight trains beside me, and I have unloaded in Philadelphia at dawn with the smell of yeast and cold river in the air. I tell you all that so when I say I know when the highway changes under me, you understand it is not my first night out. And that night, the change took hold just east of Gallup, New Mexico, where I 40 bows a little, and the land stretches its ribs to the horizon. It was early spring, but the desert holds winter like a grudge. I had come from Barstow with a load of frozen chicken for a distribution center outside Oklahoma City, the kind of run where the clock and the reefer temp are your only companions. I hit Flagstaff in daylight, watched the Ponderosa Pines crowd in like a crowd at a fence, took a fuel stop at the Big Loves west of Winslow where the wind is a constant sermon, and by the time I was passing the red cliffs around the Arizona-New Mexico line, daylight had folded like a paper map. The radio scraped country and AM weather. I kept the cab at a steady 65, and the reefer humming steady behind me, and the road unwound like a dark rope. I had been hearing drivers talk about Route 491 all my career, the old 666, the so-called Devil's Highway, running north from Gallup up past Shiprock into Colorado. I had never taken it, had no reason to, but rumor clings to a road long after they swap the numbers. Strange cargo that goes light on scales. Shadows that draft behind you like you owe them something. I do not put much stock in superstition because superstition will make you miss a real hazard. But I listen anyway. You listen when a dozen different voices tell you a stretch of asphalt keeps its own time. The night I am telling about, 491, was only a sign to my left as I crossed the interchange. Just another green panel catching my headlights and throwing them back at me for a second. And that second is when the first thing went odd. It was nothing dramatic, not at first. Just the sound of the reefer unit hitching its tone like a throat clearing. A brief sag, then back up to where it had been. I checked the head unit on my dash repeater, and the temperature held steady at -10, no alarm. The ammeter showed I was charging fine. The wind had gone down. Out here, the smell at night is creosote and cold dirt and truck exhaust. A clean stink that is honest in a way. City air never island. The sky was big and gold dusted with stars. The road itself was clean of traffic. That quiet felt like a favor, until about 10 miles past Gallup when I noticed I had not seen a single set of taillights in 20 minutes. If you run I-40, you know there is always somebody somewhere. An eastbound set of chicken lights, a minivan with sleepy kids, a motorcycle foolish enough to be out at midnight, but the mirrors held nothing but the reflection of my own lights eaten by distance, and the world narrowed down to my beams, and the white lines dashing out, and the tan shoulders sliding by. I told myself it was late, and I was just between clusters, but I glanced at my clock anyway. 12:17 a.m. That is not a dead time on the interstate. That is a time when freight is moving. The second thing was the mile markers. The desert plays tricks with distance. A mesa looks an hour away and is at your window in 10 minutes, or it hangs there forever, like a painting. But the markers do not lie. They climb or fall in order, numbers green and reflective, a kind of heartbeat you can count even when your own pulse disappears in the engine's thrum. I saw mile 28, then 27, then 26, and then 28 again, crisp and wrong as a miscounted rosary bead. My stomach made a small fist. I told myself somebody had misset a post or moved it for construction, but there had been no cones and no sign of fresh dirt. I said out loud, though I promised myself I would only narrate this in my head, that it was fine. The cab light up above threw a weak halo when I pushed it with my knuckle, then snapped off. I kept going. The third thing was the shape between the lanes. You can see a lot, in split seconds, at 65. This was a long-limbed splayed thing, like a dead elk or a tarp blown off a load. It lay in the median, thin as paper but occupying shape, stretched lengthwise, gray against the darker gray of shrubs. My headlights pulled it from the dark like teeth from gum. For just a second more, I could persuade myself it was debris until the thin thing folded in a way that was not the way anything without joints folds. And then it was gone, as if my beam had shaved it away. I put my hands tight on the wheel and did not move my foot. If you are going through something you do not fully see, you hold your line. That is how you make it, out of black ice and out of deep fog, and by God, it is how you make it through remembering. I passed a rest area without lights. The sign said it was open, but the building squatted dark, and the parking lot was a spill of black rectangles, not trucks. No idling engines, no rattling reefer units, no diesel clatter. I could smell no coffee, which is nothing, and it is everything. I kept going because there was nothing else to do. The radio had dropped to a whisper of static. I tried a podcast I keep for night runs, a long, boring one where a historian with a soft voice goes on about obscure wars, and it stuttered like the road itself had bad service. I clicked it off, and the cab filled with the sound of my own engine, and a noise that I recognized from childhood when we lived near a field. It was the sound of cicadas in July, that dry electric rattle. Only this was March, and the desert, and the insects were not in season. I leaned forward in the seat, the way everyone does when something asks you to make yourself smaller. Around mile 19, or what my eyes said was 19, the white fog began to appear low to the road. Not a fog, really, but crawling breath that hugged the asphalt. A long white ribbon that ran up out of the ditch and traced the center lines and dragged behind me like a wedding train after the fact. It did not affect my vision, did not bead on the glass, did not even register as moisture in the air. It just moved with me, at first like a trick of the eyes, then like a choice it made. The desert around me stayed black and star-pocked. The ribbon stayed white and warm-looking, the way breath and cold light can look warmer than air. I did not touch the brakes. I did not eat. I did not drink. I thought of a stretch of 491 I had never taken and how a new number does not change a road's old habits. And then the smell came in as soft as a whisper slipping under a door. If you have hauled meat long enough, you know the smell of thaw. It is not rot. It is not sweet. It is a curl of iron and wet, a penny in the mouth, a faintness that says something at the right temperature for preservation has tilted by a degree. My head unit still showed -10. My trailer did not shudder, but the smell threaded through the cab and sat in my sinuses like a guest who does not say his name. I breathed through my mouth and still tasted it. I took a sip of coffee, and it tasted as if the water had been drawn from a rusted hydrant. And then the fourth thing came on like a switch thrown, and I knew the road had decided what kind of night it would be. There is a grade east of Gallup that is not much to speak of in daylight. At night, it pulled odd. Not like a grade, not like a headwind, but like a small hand on the back of the trailer tugging, a child's hand, persistent and petulant. My speed held, but the engine note sounded like I was pushing through something denser than air. The ribbon cinched closer to the bumper. I told myself to think in mechanics. If something is dragging, check the airlines, check the brakes, check the hubs. But I was still rolling, and the gauges said all was well except nothing was well. The desert widened to the horizon, and I rolled through the middle of a room that wanted me knowing I was inside it. That is the best I can do for it. I saw a sign that should not have been there. Freight drivers know signs the way musicians know scales. This one was a county-maintained piece, battered, white background with black letters. It said frontage road closed ahead, which was a lie, because the frontage road was dust and weeds, and the only thing ahead of me was the interstate and the dark. I passed it and watched it in my mirror, and in the mirror it did not exist. I took a breath and felt the air go in like it had to punch a card, and then miles went by, with no numbers and no exit tabs, and nothing but the black and the ribbon and the cicadas. And finally, I let myself think a name. The night was not empty. The night was occupied. I have seen bodies on the road, and I have seen the aftermath of someone's bad hour, and I have carried a load to a funeral home in Kansas City, and I have put my hand on survivors' shoulders in truck stop diners when all they could do was stir cream into coffee. I do not scare the way I did when I was 20, and everything in this world could begin or end with a flash. But I say this with no shame. There is a place in a driver's mind where fear is allowed to park, a corner where you keep the logbook of things you will not explain to police or dispatchers or your wife on the phone, because language will make it polite when it is not polite. That place opened and made room. The fifth thing was not a thing but a subtraction. I realized I could not recall the last time I blinked. My eyes did not burn, and they did not water, and the glass in front of me seemed as smooth as a frozen pond. I reached up to rub one eye, and my hand stopped halfway, because the wheel felt warm and alive, and I could not let go of it, not because I feared wrecking, but because the wheel did not want to be without me. When I did pry my fingers loose, I felt grooves in the leather I had never noticed. Grooves like thumbprints. Grooves that matched my own hands like a handshake. I rubbed my eye and touched cold sweat on my cheek. I put both hands back on the wheel. The cicadas fell silent. The ribbon pulled ahead of me across the lanes and snaked down an exit ramp that had not been there a moment before. The green sign that guards all exits arced above my lane and told me in white letters the name of a place that has never existed on I-40. It told me to take exit 17 for Red Mesa service area. I did not make the turn like a decision. The truck made it the way a body breathes. I took the ramp down into a curve of asphalt that should have put me onto a state road. Instead, the ramp widened into a flat of gravel, where a building squatted in the center like a garage someone poured a diner around. It was a long, low structure with a tin roof and a line of fuel pumps out front under a canopy, the kind abandoned in the 70s when the interstate bypassed half of America. Only it was not abandoned. The canopy bulbs glowed the flat yellow of bug lights. A banner flapped on the far wall between two Coke machines with the smiling faces peeled off. The banner said all rigs, welcome. I pulled up to a pump because that is what you do at a service area. My engine idled. The reefer purred. The cicadas did not return. The ribbon had run under the canopy and pooled around the pump island, like milk spilled in slow motion. I sat there with my foot on the brake and my hands locked, and told myself to shift to neutral and set the brakes. And I did neither, because something had changed in the air, and sat now at the last bench in my mind, like a man you do not know, at your own kitchen table. I looked around the lot. It was full of trucks, but not full in the way you are used to seeing them. There were no modern tractors, no chrome grinning like a mouthful of coins. The trucks were pale as moths and squared off, narrow-nosed, the kind they used to show with smiling cartoon drivers in children's books. There were farm trucks with wooden racks and a milk tanker curved like a bullet and a pair of flatbeds with tarps that moved slightly though the wind was at a standstill. Sun-faded logos ghosted the doors. The pumps themselves were painted in a scheme no company uses anymore, the colors wrong by a generation. I knew then that I had left the map. I was nowhere and every place old enough to be forgotten. I did what any driver would do. I looked for the clerk. The building had a glass door with the hours printed in block letters, and the buzzer dinged when I pushed it open. The air inside smelled like coffee burned down to its bones and fryer oil that had died and gone to grease heaven. A television mounted in the corner showed snow. Wire racks held snacks with old-time fonts, cheerful mascots wearing caps. A refrigerated case hummed, and the sound tugged the same place in me that the reefer hum tugged, the place where you want to shiver. There were no people, but that is not exactly true. The room felt people, like a theater before the projector starts, like a church after the sermon, when the air still holds voices. A chalkboard behind the counter said the breakfast special was chicken fried steak and 3 eggs, and I noticed my name chalked beneath it in a different hand and a darker stroke. It said, "Keep the coffee hot for me," and then my name, and then a time that matched my dashboard clock, even though the sign was old enough to have learned dust by first name. I put my hand on the counter to steady myself, and the laminate under my palm trembled with the faint vibration of 1,000 steps taken over decades. There are places where time does not move forward like we think. It moves sideways, or it circles, or it sits and waits, and then jumps. On the counter sat a jar of pickled eggs clouded to the color of nicotine, and a ring of trucker hats with logos of companies that had been swallowed by bigger companies. One hat had the logo of the outfit my father worked for when I was a kid, the one that paid him in road miles instead of money some weeks. I had not said his name out loud in years. In the mirror behind the counter, I saw my own face and the face behind me. And it was the man in the last bench of my mind, only he wore my jacket and my cap, and he stood next to my shoulder like I had stood behind him a minute ago. I did not turn around. I listened. There are times to look, and there are times not to. I am telling this straight, so I will not adulterate it with suspense. The man behind me put a hand on my shoulder, and it was my hand and not my hand. It fit to the groove in the leather on my wheel. He did not speak, because if he spoke, he would be me and I would have to answer. He squeezed once, a signal the way drivers used to signal on 2 lanes when it was safe to pass. Then the door buzzer dinged again, and a wind came through the room, and the chalkboard squealed on its nail, and the jar of eggs ticked against the glass like a clock counting 1 second. And I knew I was being asked to pay for something, or take something, or both. I set a 20 on the counter. I do not know why. It felt like the thing decent folks do when they are leaving a place they do not fully understand. My name next to keep the coffee hot was gone when I looked again. The hats were all the same hat with my father's old company logo. The refrigerated case hummed, and the sound bent lower, like a voice holding a note too long. I backed out of the room because turning my back would have been wrong. Outside, the pumps were not the same pumps. They were older. They were newer. They were the same. The ribbon of white breath moved under my feet and slid into my shadow and ran up into the trailer and settled there like a sleeping thing. The cicadas started again, and this time I could tell they were not insects but something trying out the sound of insects. I climbed into my cab and the wheel was cool as if no one had held it in hours. My handprints were gone. I rolled forward on gravel that felt like river rock. The lot fed onto a ramp that was not the ramp I had taken. It curved up into a lightless cut. For a moment, my headlights threw up a green sign with exit numbers that were not numbers but something wrong, wearing numbers like a face. I held my lane, and then there was the Interstate again, black and compliant, and the mile marker said 21, though I do not know in what sequence. I glanced at my dash repeater. -10 held steady. The smell was gone. The cicadas ceased, as if the hand on their dimmer had been turned. In my mirrors, the service area did not exist. In front of me, red taillights appeared at last, a pair, then 3, then a run of them like beads on a string. I took my place among the living and the dead without knowing which I was. I made Oklahoma City by morning. The sun, in that part of the country, rises, like someone turning a page. The distribution center had chain link topped with knives and a guard with a thermos. I backed into 47 after 1, try and set my brake, and felt like a man who had arrived at a place that pretends to be ordinary for his sake. The receiver checked the load and signed the bills, and no one mentioned any smell. I walked to the break room and poured coffee and sat at a plastic table that had been wiped with a rag that had wiped 1,000 miles off 1,000 stories. There is something you do at the end of a night like that. You look for proof you do not really want to find. You check the odometer against the log. You check the fuel slip against the gauge. You check the tires for stones that are not stones. You look at your phone and see if a photo has appeared you did not take. I did those things and found a normal morning, offering me a handout with my name spelled right. It should have comforted me, but comfort needs a before and an after, and I was not sure I had either. I kept rolling that week. I took I-35 up through Kansas, crossed the Flint Hills where the grass cuts the wind into cloth, caught I-70 across Missouri and into Illinois, ran the length of Indiana flat as a griddle, and I did not stop at night unless the stop was crowded and noisy and thick with the life of it. I avoided lonely pumps and silent diners and old signs. I kept to chain truck stops with bright music and floor cleaner smells. The road behaved. The reefer held temp. The radio did not spit cicadas. A month went by, maybe 2, measured not by calendars, but by the boxed meals I microwaved, and the receipts that piled like snow in the envelope in my logbook. I will not say I nearly forgot, because that is not what happens. You just learn how to drive with the passenger. He sits quiet until some road reminds him of his rights. In late June, I was eastbound again on I-40, a different load, different hour. The day had been clear and hot, and the desert had pulled the sweat out of me like string. I passed Needles, and the river glinted like a blade. Angled up toward Kingman, turned the radio low, and let the wind talk. When the dusk slid over the land, I told myself I would shut down at Holbrook, maybe even splurge on a slice of pie at the diner behind the motel. I promised myself ordinary things and believed them. I crossed into New Mexico, and the stars walked out like cattle. Gallup's lights glowed ahead like a small city in a snow globe. I had not thought about that exit, and I had not said its name, and I had not looked for a ribbon of breath. I saw the sign anyway. It was not the sign for 491, though that was there. It was not a county sign, not a frontage closure, not a speed limit. It was a billboard half torn, and it showed a smiling waitress holding a coffee pot with steam drawn like cartoon water. And the lettering across the top said, "Keep it hot," and the name on her name tag was the name I have, the one my father said in a yard in Arkansas when the cicadas were real. I drove under it with my mouth open and did not admit that I had been waiting. I passed Gallup. I saw a rest area that had lights in it this time, and trucks shouldered in like cattle at a trough. I kept going. Mile 28, mile 27, mile 26. The numbers took their proper turns. The reefer held its tone. The engine note was a friend. I told myself what I had told myself in that first moment months before. It is a road like any other road, and you know roads. Keep the wheel straight and let the truck do what it was made to do. I have not spoken of this to law or kin. I put it here because the highway collects stories, the way fences collect tumbleweeds, and every now and then one catches that is not just wind-pushing trash. Some nights when I roll through a stretch of Oklahoma where the air smells flat and the lightning crawls along the horizon like a hand on a banister, I tune the radio between stations and I hear the burr of insects that are not insects, and I smell a thread of iron in the air and I feel grooves in the wheel not cut by knives. And I know the service area is out there somewhere with its yellow bulbs and its hats and its chalkboard learning names. I do not turn off for it. I do not go looking for it. I am not sure we choose that kind of place. I think it takes us if it wants, and let us go if it wants, and leaves a mark not on the odometer but on that bench in your mind where the stranger sits. Sometimes, when the night is thinnest and the window glass has your reflection floating in it like someone pacing a hallway, I see that other me in the mirror over my shoulder, patient and steady and full of the same miles, and I feel his hand on my shoulder, and I brace for the buzzer and the wind and the eggs ticking like a second, and it does not come. Sometimes I pull into a crowded pilot and park between two reefers and sleep like a man who has been allowed to sleep. Sometimes I wake at 3 with my heart in the wrong gear and the smell of thaw in my mouth, and I check the temp, and it is a faithful -10. Sometimes I think of my father's hands, and the logo on that hat, and the way the highway keeps the past, the way the desert keeps bones, covered, sanded, never gone. This is the part I do not tell, but I am going to set it down, because leaving it out would be lying by omission. In Amarillo one afternoon, weeks after the first night and weeks before the billboard, I swung by a small part shop to replace a mirror bracket, and the kid behind the counter rang me up and slid a jar of pickled eggs across the glass as a joke. I smiled because you play along with people, and because the jar was the same jar, and that is impossible, and also the only thing that makes sense. I paid for my bracket and left the jar on the counter and walked to my truck, and the sun caved my eyes, and I sat behind the wheel, and I felt the grooves, and I said in my head, keep it hot, and then my name, and the cab filled with the smell of coffee. That was coffee, and not iron. And I drove out into ordinary traffic with a smile that had nothing to do with jokes. I cannot say why that was the moment I knew I had not gotten away. I am still out here hauling what needs hauling. 2 hands on the wheel, miles ticking their old steady order. And if the service area wants me again, it knows my hours. The road has a memory longer than any of us. If you go east past Gallup on a night when the world is quiet as a cut string and you see a white ribbon on the asphalt that does not bead on your glass, keep your line and keep your hands tight. And if you stop, pay in cash and do not turn your back on the mirror. And if someone puts a hand on your shoulder, let the moment be a signal and not a command. You will know the difference when it comes. The highway will teach you. The highway has all the time there, island.